The streets of Manila buzzed with the sound of jeepneys honking, vendors shouting, and children laughing as they chased each other barefoot through the dusty sidewalks. In the middle of that chaos stood Miguel Santos, a thin 14-year-old boy holding a battered guitar with chipped wood and loose strings. His shirt was faded, his slippers nearly broken, but when he opened his mouth to sing, the world around him seemed to pause. The familiar chords of Hotel California flowed through his voice, raw yet powerful, carrying an emotion that no one expected from a child so young. People walking past slowed their steps, some stopping completely, drawn by the haunting melody. A man selling roasted corn leaned on his cart, listening intently, while a young couple placed coins in Miguel's old tin can that served as his collection box. His mother, Luz Vaminda, stood quietly at a distance, her eyes filled with pride and sadness. She knew how hard life was for her son, singing on the streets to help buy rice for dinner, yet she also believed that his voice carried something extraordinary, something worth far more than the few pesos dropped in the can. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm orange as Miguel reached the chorus, his voice rising above the noise of Manila. For a moment, the streets felt like a grand stage, and Miguel was no longer just a poor boy singing for survival, he was an artist commanding the attention of strangers. The crowd clapped and cheered as he finished the last line, but Miguel simply bowed his head humbly and gave a small smile. Deep down, though, a fire burned in his heart, whispering that this gift could carry him far beyond the streets of Manila, to places he had only dreamed about. The karaoke bar in Quezon City was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and the faint smell of grilled food drifting in from the street. Inside, neon lights flickered above a small stage where locals usually sang for fun after long days of work. On this night, though, the atmosphere shifted when Miguel Santos stepped up to the microphone. His best friend, Diego Ramos, sat at the front table with a phone in his hand, ready to record every second. Miguel looked nervous, his fingers trembling as he adjusted the microphone stand. A few people chuckled softly, doubting what a thin, shy 14-year-old boy could do in front of a grown-up crowd. Then the opening chords of Hotel California played, and Miguel closed his eyes. The moment he began to sing, the bar grew quiet. His voice carried a richness that seemed impossible for someone his age, a sound both fragile and powerful, as if it was shaped by years of untold struggles. Patrons stopped mid-conversation, their drinks untouched. The bartender leaned forward, listening closely, while waitresses paused in the doorway. Miguel's tone climbed effortlessly through the chorus, filling the room with something raw and magnetic. Diego's jaw dropped, realizing this wasn't just good. This was world-class. By the second verse, the entire bar was watching him with wide eyes, clapping along softly. A man whispered, "That boy's voice, it gives me goosebumps." When the song ended, the silence was broken by thunderous applause, people rising to their feet, cheering as though they had just witnessed something historic. Miguel smiled shyly, bowing, while Diego grabbed his arm and said excitedly, "Bro, you belong on a world stage, not just here." Miguel's heart raced, and in that moment, he started to believe it might be true. In Cebu City, the air was heavy with the sound of neighbors chatting, children playing by the sari-sari store, and the distant echo of tricycles rumbling down the narrow streets. Miguel Santos stood outside his small wooden house, his old backpack slung over one shoulder, as if it carried the weight of all his dreams. His mother, Luz Vaminda, held his hands tightly, her eyes welling with tears that she tried hard to hide. The whole barangay had gathered to see him off, some clapping him on the back, others handing him small tokens, rosaries, snacks for the trip, and whispered prayers for luck. Miguel's best friend, Diego Ramos, grinned proudly while struggling to hide his own sadness at saying goodbye. "Don't forget us when you become famous," he teased, though his voice cracked slightly. Miguel laughed softly, but his eyes shone with nervous determination. Luz Vaminda finally pulled him into a tight embrace, whispering, "Anak, this is your chance. Make us proud. No matter what happens, remember we love you." Miguel felt her warmth and the tremor in her voice, and for a moment, he didn't want to let go. The neighbors erupted into cheers as the jeepney arrived to take him to the airport. Children waved small handmade signs saying, "Go Miguel," while old folks clasped their hands in prayer. As he climbed into the jeepney, Miguel looked back one last time at the place that had shaped him, the humble streets, the faces that believed in him, and his mother's teary smile. He raised his hand in a promise, silently vowing to return not as the poor boy who sang on the streets, but as someone who carried the voice of Cebu to the world. The jeepney pulled away, leaving echoes of hope behind him. The bright lights of Los Angeles were blinding as Miguel Santos stepped onto the Grand America's Got Talent stage, his small frame dwarfed by the towering set and massive audience. The buzz of thousands of people filled the air, but Miguel could only hear the pounding of his heart. He clutched the microphone with both hands, his palms sweaty, his knees slightly trembling. The judges, Simon Cowell, Sofia Vergara, Heidi Klum, and Howie Mandel, watched curiously, expecting little from the shy 14-year-old boy who introduced himself softly in accented English. "What are you singing for us today?" Simon asked, leaning forward with his usual sharp gaze. "Hotel California, by the Eagles," Miguel replied nervously, his voice almost breaking. A ripple of surprise passed through the audience. It wasn't a song usually sung by children. The track began, and for a split second, Miguel froze, but then he closed his eyes and let the first note escape. The room shifted instantly. His voice soared with a haunting purity, carrying the weight of his struggles and the depth of his soul. The crowd fell silent, listening as every lyric seemed to cut straight to the heart. Simon's eyes widened, his hand slowly lifting to his mouth as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. By the chorus, people in the audience were already on their feet, clapping and swaying to the rhythm, while Heidi whispered, "Oh my God, he's amazing." Miguel opened his eyes briefly and saw the sea of glowing faces, but he didn't falter. He sang harder, stronger, as if this was the only chance he would ever get. His voice rang through the hall like a prayer, leaving even the judges stunned. By the final verse, Simon's eyes glistened, and the audience was on fire with applause. For Miguel, this wasn't just a performance, it was destiny unfolding. The final note of "Hotel California" lingered in the air like a whisper of magic, echoing through the massive theater as silence held the room captive. Miguel Santos stood frozen, his small hands still gripping the microphone, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. For a heartbeat, no one moved, then the audience erupted into thunderous applause, the sound crashing like waves against the stage. People jumped to their feet, clapping, shouting, whistling his name, Miguel. Miguel. Tears welled in his mother Luzviminda's eyes as she watched from backstage, her hands pressed together as though in prayer. Miguel, overwhelmed, lowered his head shyly, unable to believe what he had just done. Suddenly, Simon Cowell leaned forward, his face softened with emotion. He wiped his eyes quickly, almost embarrassed, then stood up. "Miguel," he began, his voice breaking slightly, "that was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard in my life." The crowd roared louder, chants growing stronger. Then, without hesitation, Simon slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. The hall exploded. Golden confetti burst from the ceiling, raining down like a shower of dreams fulfilled. Miguel gasped, covering his mouth as his knees buckled. Luzviminda ran onto the stage, tears streaming, and wrapped her son in her arms as the golden rain sparkled around them. Simon stood clapping, tears now openly rolling down his face, while Sofia and Heidi cheered wildly, and Howie wiped his eyes in disbelief. Miguel's name echoed again and again, carried by thousands of voices. At that moment, he wasn't the poor boy from the streets of Manila, he was a star, chosen, celebrated, and lifted higher than he had ever imagined. With confetti falling and the world watching, Miguel Santos's dream had just begun.